In the dying embers of Earth's final forge, where the ancient art of metalworking had been declared obsolete by a galaxy that preferred synthetic materials and energy weapons, Marcus Chen hammered his last piece of true steel. The rhythmic pounding echoed through his underground workshop, a sound that had once built empires but now existed only in the memories of a stubborn few. What Marcus didn't know was that 3 star systems away, in the crystalline caves of Dracarys Prime, an ancient being stirred at the familiar sound. The dragon Kithara had been imprisoned for 7 centuries, bound by chains forged from a metal so alien and advanced that no modern technology could break them. But those chains had a weakness their creators never imagined. They recognized the harmonic frequency of true craftsmanship, the soul-deep resonance that only came from a master working with fire, hammer, and will. As Marcus's hammer fell for the last time, sending vibrations through the quantum foam that connected all things, Kithara's golden eyes opened for the first time in decades. A freedom, it seemed, would come not from advanced technology or political revolution, but from the most ancient art known to thinking beings, the transformation of raw metal into something greater than the sum of its parts. This is the story of how humanity's oldest craft became the galaxy's newest hope, and how the bond between Smith and Dragon would reshape the balance of power among the stars. Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his brow as the notification chimed on his workshop's ancient terminal. Another eviction notice, the 47th this year. He deleted it without reading the details. They were always the same. The Galactic Modernization Council deemed his forge incompatible with current safety standards and economically inefficient. What they really meant was that his work reminded them of humanity's primitive past, a past they desperately wanted to forget now that humans had joined the galactic community. The workshop sat 20 levels below New Geneva's gleaming surface, in the old subway tunnels that had been abandoned when gravity lifts made ground transportation obsolete. Down here, the air still carried the metallic tang of honest work, unlike the sterile atmosphere of the city above where everything was synthesized, replicated, or grown in vats. Marcus ran his calloused fingers along the edge of the blade he'd just finished, a kitchen knife for Mrs. Patterson in Sector 7. She was one of the few people left who still appreciated the difference between real steel and the quantum-printed substitutes that dominated the market. The blade sang under his touch, its carbon structure perfectly aligned. Through hours of careful forging and folding, no machine could replicate that harmony of elements. His grandfather's anvil dominated the center of the workshop, its surface worn smooth by 3 generations of Chen Smiths. The old man had taught Marcus that metalworking wasn't just about shaping iron, it was about understanding the soul of the material. Every piece of metal has a story, his grandfather used to say. Our job is to help it tell that story. The intercom crackled to life, startling Marcus from his memories. "Chen, you down there?" The voice belonged to Captain Sarah Rodriguez of the Geneva Security Force, one of his few friends in the upper levels. "Where else would I be?" Marcus called back, setting down the knife. "Days and days." "Got something weird for you. Found this in the evidence locker from the antique smuggling bust last month." The cargo lift hummed as it descended, carrying Sarah and a metal crate that looked older than the city above. Sarah emerged from the lift, her security uniform crisp despite the underground humidity. She was tall and athletic, with the kind of presence that came from years of keeping the peace in humanity's largest spaceport. But today she looked troubled. "The lab boys upstairs can't figure this out," she said, gesturing to the crate. "Scans show it's definitely metal, but nothing in the databases matches the composition. Thought maybe your old-fashioned eyes might see something they missed." Marcus approached the crate carefully. It was roughly 2 meters long and half as wide, made from a dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange symbols were etched along its edges, not human writing, but something far more ancient. The metal felt warm to the touch, almost alive. Where did it come from? Black market dealer named Voss. He claimed it was just decorative metalwork from some dead civilization. But when our sensors got close, half the equipment went haywire. Command wants it identified and cataloged before it goes to the Xenoarchaeology Museum. Marcus retrieved his toolkit and began examining the seams where the crate's lid met its base. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, joints so perfect they were nearly invisible, with no visible welding marks or fasteners. Whoever had made this understood metalworking at a level that made even Marcus feel like an amateur. "Help me flip it over," he said. "There's usually a maker's mark or foundry stamp somewhere." As they turned the crate, Marcus noticed something that made his breath catch. Along the bottom edge, so faint it was barely visible, were markings that looked almost like hammer strikes. But they were too precise, too deliberate to be random impacts. "It's not decorative," he whispered. "This is a tool." "What kind of tool?" Before Marcus could answer, his workshop lights dimmed. The quantum forge in the corner, a piece of modern equipment he kept for comparison purposes, sparked and went dark. Even the emergency lighting flickered uncertainly. "That's not normal," Sarah muttered, her hand instinctively moving to her sidearm. Marcus pressed his ear to the crate's surface. Deep inside, something was humming, not mechanically, but organically, like a heartbeat. The metal grew warmer under his touch, and the strange symbols began to glow with a soft blue light. "We need to open it," he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "Are you insane? This thing just knocked out half your equipment by sitting here. What happens when we actually—" "It's not trying to hurt anything," Marcus interrupted. "It's trying to communicate. The electromagnetic pulse wasn't random. It was timed to our heartbeats. Whatever's inside knows we're here." Sarah stared at him. "You're talking about it like it's alive." "Maybe it is, or maybe it was. Once." Marcus retrieved his smallest prying tools from the workbench. "In my grandfather's time, smiths believed that every blade held a piece of the maker's spirit. What if that wasn't just poetry? The seam around the crate's lid was barely visible." He inserted his tools carefully, applying pressure at precise intervals. The metal resisted at first, then seemed to recognize his technique. The lid shifted slightly, releasing a whisper of air that tasted of ozone and starlight. Inside, nestled in crystalline foam that definitely wasn't human in origin, lay a set of tools unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. A hammer with a head that seemed to be carved from a single piece of star metal, its handle wrapped in what looked like dragon scales, tongs that curved with impossible grace, their gripping surfaces lined with microscopic teeth, and at the center, a small anvil made from the same dark metal as the crate, its surface covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. "Those aren't human artifacts," Sarah said quietly. Marcus lifted the hammer reverently. It was perfectly balanced and warm to the touch despite having been sealed away for who knew how long. The moment his fingers closed around the handle, images flooded his mind. Alien forges burning under foreign stars, creatures of scales and flame working metal with their bare claws, and somewhere in the darkness between worlds something vast and ancient calling for help. He gasped and nearly dropped the hammer, but the visions continued. A dragon, for lack of a better word, chained in crystal caves, its golden scales dulled by centuries of captivity. The chains weren't just restraints. They were a form of torture designed to drain the creature's life force slowly, feeding its power to something unspeakably hungry. "Marcus." Sarah's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Marcus, talk to me!" He blinked, finding himself on his knees beside the open crate. The hammer lay beside him, its surface now glowing with the same blue light as the symbols. The workshop's lights had stabilized, but every piece of metal in the room, from his grandfather's anvil to the smallest nail, was resonating in harmony. "I saw—" It was showing me. Marcus struggled to find words for the impossible visions. "There's someone out there, Sarah. Someone who needs help. And these tools, they're the key." "Key to what?" Marcus stood slowly, his legs shaky but his purpose crystal clear. For the first time in years, he felt the same certainty his grandfather must have felt when choosing to pursue the old ways despite a changing world. "To keeping an ancient promise," he said, reaching for the alien anvil, "every master smith inherits more than just tools and techniques. We inherit responsibilities. And according to what I just saw, humanity has a debt to pay." The anvil was surprisingly light despite its size, and it hummed with potential energy as Marcus carried it to his workspace. The moment he set it down beside his grandfather's anvil, both pieces of metal began to glow. The human-made iron glowed warm and red like a banked forge fire, while the alien anvil pulsed with that strange blue radiance. "This is crazy," Sarah muttered. But she didn't try to stop him as he began arranging the alien tools alongside his familiar implements. "My grandfather used to say that the universe has a sense of balance," Marcus said, running his hands over the strange hammer's surface. "That every action creates a reaction. Every debt demands payment. For centuries, we humans struggled with metalworking, fighting to master fire and iron with primitive tools. But we weren't alone. Somewhere out there, other beings were doing the same thing, and some of them were much better at it than we were." He picked up the hammer again, this time prepared for the visions. They came more gently now. Images of vast stellar forges where dragons worked metals that existed only in the hearts of stars, creating artifacts of impossible beauty and power. But with great skill came great responsibility. And when younger races needed help, the ancient smiths answered the call. "The dragons of Dracoris Prime were master craftsmen," Marcus continued, his voice taking on the rhythm of the hammer strokes he wasn't yet making. "When humanity was still banging rocks together, they were forging weapons that could cut through the fabric of space itself. But they were also teachers, sharing their knowledge with any race that showed promise and dedication to the craft." What happened to them? They were betrayed. A client race called the Hegemony pretended to seek knowledge, but what they really wanted was to steal the dragon's power. They created chains from a metal that exists outside normal space-time, something that could bind even creatures of legend. The dragons were enslaved, their life force slowly drained to power hegemony technology. The visions showed him the truth of it. Massive ships appearing in Dracoris' system, weapons that turned the dragon's own forges against them, and finally, the imprisonment of the greatest among them in crystalline caves where their power could be harvested like some kind of cosmic battery. But the chains had a weakness, Marcus said, understanding flooding through him like molten metal poured into a perfect mold. They were forged using techniques stolen from the dragons themselves, and like all great metalwork, they respond to the harmonic resonance of true craftsmanship. The hegemony thought they were so advanced that they never considered someone might still practice the old ways. Sarah was staring at him with a mixture of fascination and concern. "You're talking about traveling to another star system to break chains that have held dragon gods prisoner for centuries. With a hammer." "Not just any hammer," Marcus corrected, hefting the alien tool. "A dragon-forged hammer, made by masters who understood metal at the quantum level. And not just any smith either. I'm the last human who still knows the old techniques, the ones my grandfather learned from his grandfather, passed down in an unbroken line since the first human figured out how to work iron." He moved to his grandfather's anvil and began arranging his tools. The familiar ritual of preparation helped center his thoughts, even as the alien implements added new harmonies to the workspace's energy patterns. "The message in the visions was clear," he continued. "The Dragon Queen Kythara has been held longest, and her strength is nearly spent. But she's managed to reach out across the void, calling to anyone who might remember the old compact between smiths. Her chains can be broken, but only by someone who understands both the ancient techniques and modern metallurgy. So what's your plan? Book passage on a commercial liner and show up at this hegemony place with a suitcase full of hammers?" Marcus smiled grimly. "Something like that, yes. Though I suspect the path will be more complicated. The dragons didn't just teach metalworking, they were explorers, traders, diplomats. Their imprisonment has left a vacuum in galactic politics that the hegemony has been happy to fill. Breaking those chains won't just free ancient allies, it'll change the balance of power across half the known galaxy. The workshop fell silent except for the harmonic humming of the two anvies. Marcus could feel the weight of destiny settling around him like a familiar apron. 3 generations of his family had kept the old ways alive, waiting for this moment without knowing it would ever come. "I'll need supplies," he said finally. "Materials that can withstand interstellar travel, tools that won't degrade in alien environments. And I'll need a ship." The Geneva Port Authority has been trying to get rid of that old cargo hauler in Bay 17, Sarah said thoughtfully. "The Phoenix's dream. Her owner died without any heirs, and she's been sitting there for months because nobody wants a ship that still uses manual controls." Marcus nodded. A ship that relied on human skill rather than automated systems would be perfect for what he had in mind. "Can you arrange a meeting with the Port Authority?" "I can do better than that. I can arrange for you to be hired as a salvage consultant. The official story will be that you're evaluating the ship's metal components for recycling value. That should give you enough access to make any modifications you need." As they spoke, Marcus began sorting through his collection of raw materials. He would need to forge new tools for the journey, implements that could channel the alien techniques while remaining true to human craftsmanship traditions. The work would take weeks, maybe months, but he felt energized rather than daunted. "There's something else," Sarah said quietly. "The hegemony has a trade embassy here on Earth. They've been trying to get access to our industrial replication technology for years. If they find out what you're planning, then we make sure they don't find out until it's too late," Marcus replied. He picked up Mrs. Patterson's kitchen knife and tested its edge against a piece of scrap metal. The blade cut through the steel like it was warm butter, a reminder that even his simplest work carried power when it was done right. "I'll need to finish my outstanding orders first," he said. "Can't leave Earth with unfinished business. But while I'm working, I want you to research everything you can find about the hegemony's current operations, ship movements, trade routes, anything that might tell us how heavily guarded their prison facilities are." Sarah nodded and headed for the lift. "Marcus, that thing about every action having a reaction? I hope you're prepared for the hegemony's response when they realize what you've done." Marcus hefted the alien hammer, feeling its weight and balance settle into his grip like an old friend. "My grandfather also used to say that some debts are worth any price to pay. The dragons helped humanity reach for the stars. It's time we returned the favor." As the lift carried Sarah back to the surface, Marcus began the familiar ritual of banking his forge fire. But tonight, he wouldn't let it die completely. Tonight, and for all the nights to come until his mission was complete, he would keep the flames alive. A beacon of ancient craft in a galaxy that had forgotten the value of work done by hand and heart together. The alien anvil pulsed once more, as if approving of his decision, and Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the absolute certainty that his work mattered. Somewhere in the crystal caves of Dracoris Prime, Kythara waited for liberation, and Marcus Chen, last smith of Earth, would be the one to forge her freedom. 3 weeks into his preparation, Marcus had transformed his underground workshop into something that would have amazed even his grandfather. The ancient anvil and its alien counterpart now sat side by side, their combined resonance creating harmonics that could be felt throughout the old subway tunnels. Every tool in his collection had been reforged using techniques that blended human tradition with dragon wisdom, and the results were extraordinary. The hammer he'd completed the previous day could detect structural weaknesses in any metal from across the room. The tongs responded to his thoughts as much as his grip, adjusting their pressure automatically to whatever material they held. But the greatest achievement was the set of breaker bars he'd crafted specifically for Kythara's chains. 7 rods of varying length, each one tuned to disrupt a different frequency of binding energy. Sarah arrived as he was testing the longest bar against a sample of synthetic diamond. The rod passed through the supposedly indestructible material like it was made of mist, leaving perfectly smooth edges where the crystal structure had been convinced to simply stop existing. "That's not physically possible," Sarah said, staring at the cleanly divided diamond. "Neither is faster than light travel, but the galaxy manages it just fine," Marcus replied, wiping down the breaker bar with reverent care. "The difference is that this technology understands the universe instead of trying to brute force it into submission." Sarah set down a datapad filled with intelligence reports. "I've got good news and bad news about the hegemony. The good news is that their prison facilities on Dracoris Prime are automated, mostly robots and remote monitoring systems. The bad news is that they've got 3 battle cruisers in permanent orbit around the planet." Marcus studied the orbital diagrams and ship specifications. The hegemony vessels were impressive, heavily armed, shielded, and crewed by some of the most experienced military personnel in the galaxy. But they were also designed to fight conventional enemies, using conventional tactics. "They're expecting an invasion force," he mused. "Massed ships, coordinated attacks, military precision. They're not prepared for one man with a toolbox, one man in a century-old cargo hauler," Sarah corrected. "I've been over the Phoenix's dream with a maintenance crew. She's solid, but she's not exactly built for stealth operations." Marcus smiled. "She doesn't need to be stealthy. She needs to be invisible. And there's a difference." Over the past weeks, Marcus had been studying more than just metalworking. The visions from Kithara had included glimpses of dragon technology that operated on principles human science was only beginning to understand. One of those principles was quantum masking, the ability to convince reality that something wasn't quite there. "I've been modifying her hull plating," he explained, leading Sarah to a corner of the workshop where metal panels lay arranged in precise patterns. Each plate is inscribed with harmonics that interact with local space-time fields. When they're properly aligned, they don't make the ship invisible, they make it forgettable. Sarah picked up one of the panels, feeling its unusual weight and warmth. "Forgettable how?" "Sensors will register the ship's presence, but the data will feel unimportant to whoever's monitoring it. Radar operators will see a blip and assume it's space debris. Traffic controllers will note the signature and categorize it as a routine supply run. It's not perfect concealment, but it's something much more useful: selective attention manipulation." The technique had been one of the Dragon's greatest gifts to the galaxy, not invisibility, which was crude and detectable, but the ability to exist in plain sight without triggering alarm responses. The hegemony had stolen many dragon technologies, but they'd never understood this one because it required a fundamental shift in how one thought about existence itself. "Speaking of supply runs," Sarah said, "I've managed to get you legitimate cargo contracts for 3 different systems along the route to Dracoris Prime. The Port Authority thinks you're starting a metal recycling business. Your cover story is that you're investigating rare mineral deposits on abandoned mining worlds." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Perfect. And it's not even really a lie. I will be investigating mineral compositions. I'll just be more interested in the ones holding Dragon's prisoner." The next 2 days were spent installing the modified hull plates on the Phoenix's Dream. The ship was larger than Marcus had expected, nearly 60 meters from nose to stern, with cargo bays that could hold his entire workshop several times over. Her previous owner had been a freelance trader who'd apparently had excellent taste in engineering, because every system was well maintained and built for reliability rather than flash. The ship's computer was an older model that relied heavily on human input rather than autonomous decision-making. Marcus found this reassuring. He'd never trusted machines that thought they knew better than their operators. The navigation system still used star charts and manual plotting, which would be essential for the kind of precise approach he'd need at Dracoris Prime. Installing the quantum masking panels required recalibrating the ship's entire electrical system. Each panel had to be individually tuned to the Phoenix's specific energy signature, a process that took Marcus back to his earliest training when his grandfather had taught him to listen to metal's natural frequencies. "Every piece of metal sings," the old man had said, "but you have to know how to listen. The Phoenix's dream sang in harmonies of stressed steel and patient iron, with undertones of adventure and loneliness that spoke of years spent traveling between distant stars. Marcus worked carefully to ensure that his modifications enhanced rather than disrupted the ship's natural song, adding new melodies without drowning out the original composition. By the fourth day, the masking system was operational. Test flights around Earth's orbital space confirmed that the modifications worked as intended. Traffic controllers noticed the ship's presence but consistently categorized it as routine rather than interesting. Even when Marcus deliberately flew unusual patterns, the response was always, "Phoenix's dream, maintain current heading for traffic coordination," rather than, "Phoenix's dream, explain your intentions." The next challenge was supplies. Marcus couldn't simply load the ship with standard tools and materials. Everything would need to survive interstellar travel, alien environments, and potentially hostile action. He spent days crafting specialized storage containers that would preserve his equipment's quantum properties regardless of external conditions. Sarah proved invaluable during this phase, using her security force connections to acquire materials that would have been impossible for a private citizen to obtain. Quantum-stable alloys, crystalline storage matrices, and even small amounts of processed neutronium for the most critical components. All acquired through official channels with paperwork that would stand up to any inspection. "I still can't believe this is really happening," she said, as they loaded the last of the supply containers into the Phoenix's cargo hold. "3 months ago, you were just an old-fashioned blacksmith making kitchen knives for pensioners. Now you're planning to single-handedly destabilize galactic politics." Marcus secured the final container and activated its stasis field. "I'm not trying to destabilize anything. I'm trying to restore balance. The hegemony has had 700 years to prove they're worthy successors to the dragons. All they've done is hoard power and suppress anyone who might challenge their authority." The loading process gave him time to think about what lay ahead. The journey to Dracarys Prime would take 3 months, even with the Phoenix's efficient drive systems. 3 months alone with his thoughts, his tools, and the growing certainty that he was about to attempt something that would either change the galaxy or get him killed. But as he worked, Marcus found himself thinking less about the dangers and more about the opportunities. The visions had shown him glimpses of dragon civilization at its height, vast cities built into mountainsides, forges that could reshape matter at the subatomic level, and a philosophy that valued creation above conquest. If Kythara could be freed, if even one dragon survived with their knowledge intact, the possibilities were limitless. That evening, as he performed final systems checks on the Phoenix, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Cargo bay's proximity sensors chimed, and he looked up to see a figure approaching through the shadows between the landing platforms. The stranger was tall and thin, with the pale complexion of someone who spent most of their time in artificial environments. Their clothing was expensive but understated, and they moved with the careful precision of someone accustomed to being watched. When they stepped into the light, Marcus saw eyes the color of liquid mercury and realized he was looking at his first alien contact. "Mr. Chen," the figure said in accented but fluent English, "my name is Zeph Hay, and I represent certain interests that have been monitoring your recent activities." Marcus set down his diagnostic tablet and gave the alien his full attention. "What kind of interests?" "The kind that have been waiting centuries for someone like you to appear." Zeph Hay moved closer, and Marcus caught a scent like ozone and starlight. "You are not the only being in the galaxy who remembers the old compact with the dragons. Some of us have been working to preserve their legacy, keeping knowledge alive in secret libraries and hidden forges." The alien reached into their coat and produced a small crystalline cube that hummed with familiar energy. This contains star charts for routes through hegemony space that their patrols rarely monitor. There are also frequency codes for emergency beacons placed by dragon sympathizers throughout their territory. Should you encounter difficulties, these signals will summon help. Marcus accepted the cube carefully. It was warm to the touch and felt heavier than its size suggested, as if it contained more space than should have been physically possible. "Why are you helping me?" because the dragon's imprisonment is a wound in the fabric of reality itself, Zephe replied. Their knowledge, their power, their very existence is woven into the quantum structure of this galaxy. Every year they remain chained. The universe itself becomes a little less stable, a little less capable of supporting the complex life forms that call it home. The alien gestured toward the Phoenix's modified hull. Your techniques are crude but effective. You have managed to approximate dragon quantum masking using human metallurgy and stubborn determination. This suggests that you may indeed be capable of breaking bonds that have resisted every conventional rescue attempt. There have been other attempts? Dozens. Most failed to even reach Dracoris Prime. Those that did found the chains beyond their ability to affect. But you approach the problem from a different angle. Where others tried to overpower the bonds, you seek to persuade them. This is the Dragon Way. Zephe turned to leave, then paused. A word of warning, Mr. Bai. Chen, the hegemony is not unaware of your mission, though they do not yet understand its true nature. They know that someone has acquired dragon artifacts, and they are investigating. Your departure window is closing rapidly. The alien melted back into the shadows as silently as they'd arrived, leaving Marcus alone with the crystalline cube and a head full of new questions. He plugged the device into the Phoenix's navigation system and watched as star charts flowed across the display, routes that twisted through hyperspace in patterns that seemed almost organic, avoiding the main shipping lanes and hegemony patrol zones with elegant efficiency. The emergency beacon codes were equally fascinating. The signals used quantum entanglement to communicate across interstellar distances instantly, creating a network of dragon sympathizers that spanned the galaxy. Marcus realized that his mission wasn't as solitary as he'd assumed. Somewhere out there, other beings were working toward the same goal. That night, he made his final preparations. Personal effects were minimal. A few photos of his grandfather, his father's old leather apron, and the kitchen knife that had started this entire adventure. Tools and materials filled most of the cargo space, but he'd also packed seeds from Earth's heritage crops and digital libraries containing humanity's greatest artistic and scientific achievements. If he succeeded in freeing Kithara, he wanted to offer something worthy of the dragon's legacy. Sarah arrived at dawn to see him off. She'd brought coffee and breakfast pastries from her favorite cafe. Though Marcus was too nervous to eat much, the Phoenix's pre-flight checklist was extensive, but everything showed green across the board. I still think you're completely insane, Sarah said as they walked toward the ship's boarding ramp. But I also think you might be the most sane person in the galaxy. Does that make any sense? Marcus hugged her goodbye. My grandfather used to say that the line between genius and madness was measured in results, not intentions. Ask me again when I get back. When, not if. When, Marcus confirmed with more confidence than he felt. The universe has invested too much in this moment for it to end in failure. The Phoenix's dream lifted off as Earth's sun crested the horizon, painting the ship's modified hull in shades of gold and crimson. Marcus watched his home planet dwindle in the rear display until it was just another star among billions, then turned his attention to the navigation console and the impossible journey ahead. The first hyperspace jump felt different than he'd expected. Where commercial liners provided smooth, sanitized transitions between star systems, the Phoenix's older systems let him feel the fundamental wrongness of faster-than-light travel. Space twisted around the ship like a living thing, and for just a moment, Marcus caught a glimpse of the quantum foam that underlay all reality, a seething mass of possibility and potential that responded to observation. When they dropped back into normal space 3 light-years from Earth, Marcus understood why dragons had been such successful explorers. They hadn't conquered distance, they'd convinced it to step aside. And now, armed with their tools and carrying their hopes, he was following in their wake across the vast darkness between worlds. 2 months into his journey, Marcus had developed a routine that would have amused his grandfather. Each morning, ship's time, he performed maintenance rituals that combined traditional metalworking prayers with quantum tuning procedures. The Phoenix's dream had become more than just transportation. It was a mobile forge, a sanctuary, and increasingly a living extension of his will. The quantum masking system had performed flawlessly through 17 star systems and 3 hegemony checkpoint encounters. In each case, the inspectors had scanned the Phoenix, noted her cargo manifest of reclaimed metals and fabrication equipment, and waved her through with the kind of bored efficiency that meant their attention was elsewhere. But as they approached the outer reaches of the Dracary system, Marcus could feel the difference. This wasn't just another collection of stars and planets. This was a place where the fabric of reality itself had been wounded. The dragon's imprisonment created distortions that his modified instruments could detect from several light-years away. Quantum echoes of power constrained and slowly bleeding away. The Phoenix dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, her sensors immediately picking up the massive hegemony presence. 3 battle cruisers hung in orbit around the 4th planet like mechanical vultures, their energy signatures blazing across the electromagnetic spectrum. Dozens of automated defense platforms dotted the space around them, and patrol ships traced endless patterns through the outer system. Marcus activated Zephai's navigation aids and felt a surge of gratitude for the aliens' foresight. The alternative routes through the system avoided the main patrol corridors entirely, threading through asteroid fields and solar winds that would mask the Phoenix's approach. But even with these advantages, reaching the planet's surface would require more than just clever navigation. He spent 3 days studying the hegemony defense patterns, using the Phoenix's passive sensors to map patrol schedules and communication frequencies. The battlecruisers were formidable, but they were also predictable. Military vessels designed for conventional threats. Their sensors were calibrated for ships carrying weapons and explosives, not for a cargo hauler full of blacksmithing equipment. The breakthrough came when Marcus realized that the hegemony had made a fundamental error in their assumptions. They were guarding against rescue attempts from outside the system, but they'd never considered that someone might already be on the planet. Dracoris Prime was classified as a dead world, officially uninhabitable due to extreme geological instability and toxic atmospheric conditions. But the visions from Cathara had shown Marcus the truth. The planet wasn't dead, it was sleeping, held in stasis by the dragon's own defenses when the Hegemonian did. The crystal caves where the dragons were imprisoned weren't natural formations. They were emergency shelters, designed to preserve life until the threat passed. 700 years later, the threat remained, and the planet's automated systems were still maintaining their protective protocols. This meant there were active power sources on the surface, infrastructure that could be accessed by someone who understood dragon technology. And thanks to his grandfather's tools and his own modifications, Marcus was beginning to understand it very well indeed. The insertion plan he developed was audacious in its simplicity. Rather than trying to sneak past the orbital defenses, he would use them. Commercial shipping records showed regular supply runs to the hegemony facilities, automated cargo haulers that delivered equipment and consumables without requiring human oversight. The Phoenix's quantum masking would convince the traffic control systems that she was one of these routine deliveries, scheduled and authorized and utterly unremarkable. Marcus spent 2 days modifying the ship's transponder codes and cargo manifests, creating documentation that would satisfy automated systems without triggering human review. The Phoenix's dream became the Stellar Foundry, registered to a hegemony subsidiary and carrying specialized mining equipment for geological survey operations. Even if someone bothered to verify the paperwork, they would find legitimate corporate records that had been carefully adjusted through cybernetic infiltration. Another gift from Zephai's network, the approach to Dracoris Prime began at dawn, ship's time. Marcus had timed the insertion to coincide with the shift change at the orbital monitoring station, when tired operators would be least likely to question routine traffic. The Phoenix drifted in among a convoy of genuine supply ships, her signature lost in the crowd of identical energy readings. The planet below was nothing like the visions had shown him. Where there had once been crystal cities and mountain forges, now there was only barren rock and twisted metal. The hegemony had strip-mined vast sections of the surface, leaving scars that were visible from orbit. But Marcus's instruments detected something the conquerors had missed: Deep underground, power sources still hummed with patient energy. Landing clearance came through automatically, directing the Stellar Foundry to touchdown pad 17 in Mining Sector Delta. Marcus followed the guidance signals down through atmosphere that tasted of metal and despair, watching the Phoenix's hull temperature gauges as they descended through air thick with industrial pollutants. The landing pad was a flat circle of fused rocks surrounded by abandoned mining equipment. Automated systems guided the Phoenix to a perfect touchdown, then sealed the area with an environmental barrier to protect against the planet's toxic air. Marcus waited exactly 37 minutes, the standard time for a cargo hauler system diagnostics, before opening the Phoenix's bay doors. What greeted him was devastation beyond anything he'd imagined. The mining operation had carved away entire mountain ranges, leaving behind pits that descended for kilometers into the planet's crust. Massive extractors sat idle and rusting, their work apparently complete. But scattered among the industrial wreckage were fragments of something far more beautiful, crystal formations that had once been part of the dragon cities, now broken and dark but still singing faintly with harmonic resonance. Marcus suited up in environmental gear and began unloading his equipment. The cover story required him to actually perform geological surveys, and the role provided perfect justification for carrying sensitive instruments across the planet's surface. But his real target lay deeper than any mining operation had reached, in the crystalline caves where Kythara waited for liberation. The dragon's mental presence was stronger here, a constant whisper at the edge of consciousness that guided him toward a section of the mining complex that appeared completely ordinary. But his grandfather's tools detected hidden structures beneath the surface, chambers carved from living stone, and sealed with quantum locks that had resisted 7 centuries of hegemony technology. Finding the entrance took most of the day. The dragons had hidden their emergency shelters behind layers of geological deception, making them appear to be nothing more than natural cave formations. But Marcus's tools could penetrate the illusions, revealing the truth beneath the careful camouflage. The access tunnel began behind what looked like a collapsed mining shaft, its mouth sealed with debris that proved to be an elaborate holographic projection. Marcus passed through the false barrier and found himself in a corridor that had been carved from a single massive crystal, its walls alive with patterns of light that responded to his presence. The deeper he went, the stronger Kythara's presence became. She was calling to him now, her mental voice weak but filled with desperate hope. The chains that bound her weren't just physical restraints. They were quantum parasites, feeding on her life force and using it to power hegemony technology across the galaxy. Every ship in their fleet, every automated system in their empire, drew its energy from the slow death of creatures whose civilization had spanned the stars when humanity was still learning to make fire. The cavern where Kythara was imprisoned defied description. It was vast beyond measurement, its crystal walls forming a perfect sphere that seemed to exist partially outside normal space. And at the center, suspended in a web of chains that hurt to look at directly, hung the most magnificent being Marcus had ever seen. Kythara was enormous, easily 50 meters from nose to tail, with scales that shifted between gold and deep emerald depending on the angle of observation. Her wings were folded close to her body, bound by chains that pulsed with malevolent energy. But her eyes were ancient beyond measure, filled with wisdom and pain, and a hope that had somehow survived 700 years of torment. When those golden eyes fixed on Marcus, he felt the full weight of dragon consciousness touch his mind. It was like standing before a waterfall of pure thought, overwhelming and beautiful and terrifying all at once. But Kythara gentled her mental presence, wrapping him in warmth and gratitude that brought tears to his eyes. "You came," her voice whispered in his thoughts. "After so long, after so much suffering, a true smith has finally come." Marcus approached the web of chains slowly, his grandfather's tools humming with recognition. The bonds were even more complex than the visions had suggested. Not just physical restraints, but quantum locks that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Breaking them would require more than just strength or skill. It would require understanding the fundamental forces that held reality together. "I need to study the binding pattern," he said aloud, knowing that Kythara could hear him. "Each chain is tuned to a different aspect of your life force. I have to find the resonance frequency that will convince them to release you without causing a cascade failure." "Time grows short," Kythara replied, and Marcus could feel her weakness like a physical ache. "The parasites grow stronger as I grow weaker. If I die while bound, the released energy will tear a hole in reality itself." Marcus set up his equipment carefully, arranging the alien anvil and tools in a circle around the chain nexus. Each piece of metal had been forged to interact with quantum forces at the deepest level, but this would be their ultimate test. He would have one chance to get this right. Failure would mean not just Kythara's death, but potentially the destruction of the entire star system. The analysis took hours. Each chain was a masterwork of malevolent craftsmanship, designed to drain specific aspects of dragon essence while maintaining a perfect balance that prevented either escape or death. The hegemony had learned well from their stolen knowledge, creating a prison that was both unbreakable and sustainable. But they had made one critical error. In their desire to create the perfect energy source, they had made the chains too efficient. The bonds were so finely tuned to Kythara's quantum signature that they had become dependent on her continued existence. This created a vulnerability, a frequency resonance that could be exploited if approached with sufficient precision. Marcus began the liberation process at sunset, when the planet's magnetic field would be most stable. He started with the smallest chain, using the hammer and tongs to create harmonic vibrations that traveled through the quantum structure of the bonds. The work was exhausting, requiring him to maintain perfect focus while channeling forces that existed beyond normal space-time. The first chain dissolved after 2 hours of careful persuasion, its quantum locks finally convinced that their function was complete. Kythara gasped as a portion of her strength returned, and her scales brightened perceptibly. But 6 chains remained, and each one would be more difficult than the last. Marcus worked through the night, stopping only when exhaustion threatened his precision. By dawn, 3 more chains had fallen, and Kythara was strong enough to assist the process, her ancient knowledge guiding his hands as they worked together to unravel bonds that had seemed unbreakable. The 5th chain proved the most difficult. It was woven through the quantum structure of Kythara's heart, directly interfacing with her life force in a way that made removal incredibly dangerous. One mistake would stop her heart permanently, but leaving it in place would mean incomplete freedom. "Trust the tools," Kythara whispered as Marcus hesitated over the delicate work. "They remember their makers. Let them guide you." Marcus closed his eyes and let his grandfather's hammer find its own rhythm. The tool moved with a will of its own, seeking the exact resonance needed to convince the chain that its work was finished. When the bond finally released, both Smith and Dragon cried out in relief, as life force that had been slowly draining away for centuries suddenly flowed free. The last 2 chains fell quickly after that, their quantum locks collapsing in cascade as the binding pattern lost cohesion. When the final restraint dissolved, Kythara spread her wings for the first time in 700 years, and the cavern filled with light that had nothing to do with conventional physics. She was beautiful and terrible and utterly magnificent, a creature of pure will made manifest in scales and sinew. But more than that, she was free, and through her, the balance of power in the galaxy was about to shift in ways that would echo across the stars for generations to come. "Now," Kythara said, her mental voice strong and clear for the first time since Marcus had arrived. "We must leave this place before the hegemony realizes what has happened. And we must gather the tools of liberation, for I am not the only dragon who requires freedom." Marcus began packing his equipment, but he was already thinking beyond the immediate escape. This was just the beginning. The first step in a campaign that would either restore the dragons to their rightful place in galactic civilization. Either way, there was no going back. The last Smith of Earth had kept faith with ancient promises, and now The galaxy would learn what that truly meant. The escape from Dracoris Prime required every trick Marcus had learned about quantum masking and a few that Kythara improvised on the spot. The dragon's mere presence disrupted the planet's monitoring systems. Her free consciousness was like a stone thrown into a still pond, sending ripples through dimensions the hegemony's sensors couldn't properly interpret. They made it to the Phoenix's dream just as the first alarm klaxons began wailing across the mining complex. Automated systems were reporting catastrophic energy fluctuations and containment breach in geological survey sector, but the operators who might have recognized the true significance of those readings wouldn't arrive for hours. By then, Marcus and Kythara would be deep in hyperspace, following routes that existed only in dragon memory. The challenges of traveling with a 50-meter dragon had occurred to Marcus during the liberation process, but Kythara had solutions that spoke to the sophistication of her people's technology. Dragons weren't bound by the same physical limitations as lesser beings. Their consciousness could exist independently of their bodies when necessary, and their bodies could be folded through dimensional spaces that didn't quite exist in normal reality. What boarded the Phoenix looked like an elderly human woman with golden eyes and scales that caught the light along her temples and hands. But Marcus could feel the vast presence folded into that seemingly fragile form, like an ocean compressed into a teacup through mathematics that human science was only beginning to glimpse.
"It will serve for now," Kythara said in a voice that carried harmonics of distant thunder.
Though I confess it has been some time since I wore flesh this limiting. How do your people manage with only 3 dimensions? Carefully, Marcus replied, sealing the Phoenix's airlock as the ship's automated systems prepared for emergency departure. And with a lot of coffee, the takeoff was rougher than their landing had been. Automated defense platforms were coming online throughout the system, their targeting computers seeking threats they couldn't quite define. But the Phoenix's quantum masking held, convincing the hegemony systems that the energy readings were just echoes from the geological disturbance below. They made it to the hyperspace jump point with minutes to spare. As the Phoenix folded space around itself and dove into the quantum foam between stars, Marcus felt a sensation he'd never experienced before, the presence of something vast and ancient-looking back at him through the twisted geometry of faster-than-light travel. "The dragons are awakening," Kythara explained as the ship settled into its travel configuration. "My liberation sends signals across the quantum web that connects all dragon-forged artifacts. Those of my people who still live will know that the age of imprisonment is ending." She moved to the observation port and gazed out at the swirling energies of hyperspace, her expression mixing hope with ancient sorrow. "There are 17 others still bound, scattered across the galaxy in hegemony prison facilities. Some are stronger than I was, some weaker. All require liberation, but the approach must be different for each." Marcus joined her at the port, watching reality bend around the Phoenix's passage. How different! The hegemony learned from their first successes. Each subsequent prison was designed to counter the weaknesses they perceived in the previous ones. The chains that held me were parasitic, they fed on my life force. But those that bind my brother Zarathos are crystalline. They trap his consciousness in infinite recursive loops. The bonds holding my sister Thessarian exist partially outside time itself, aging her at an accelerated rate that should have killed her centuries ago. The magnitude of what they were attempting began to sink in. This wasn't just a rescue mission, it was a campaign against an empire that had spent 700 years perfecting the art of imprisoning beings whose power could reshape reality itself. "We'll need more than just the 2 of us," Marcus said. "The hegemony won't be caught off guard again. They'll be expecting rescue attempts now." Kythara smiled, and for a moment her human guise flickered to reveal something far more magnificent underneath. "They will indeed, but they still think in terms of conventional warfare, fleets and armies and weapons that destroy through brute force. They do not understand that some battles are won through creation rather than destruction. She gestured toward Marcus's equipment, still secured in the cargo bay. "You freed me not by breaking my chains, but by convincing them to release me. This is the dragon way, to work with the natural order rather than against it. The hegemony has never understood this principle, which is why they have always been our inferiors despite their technological achievements." Over the next several days, as they traveled toward their first destination, Kithara began teaching Marcus techniques that human metallurgy had never conceived of. She showed him how to forge metal that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, how to create tools that could manipulate probability itself, and most importantly, how to think beyond the limitations of three-dimensional space. "Your grandfather's teachings were correct in all the ways that matter," she explained during one particularly intense lesson. "Metal does have a soul, and that soul can be shaped through will and skill. But what he could not have known is that the universe itself is made of the same fundamental substance, quantum foam that responds to conscious intention when properly focused." The lessons were exhausting in ways that Marcus had never experienced. It wasn't just his hands and mind that ached after each session, but something deeper, as if his very essence was being stretched to accommodate new ways of understanding reality. But with each breakthrough, he could feel his capabilities expanding exponentially. Their first stop was the Veil Nebula, a region of space where dying stars had created clouds of exotic matter that played havoc with conventional sensors. Hidden within the nebula was a station that officially didn't exist, a gathering point for dragon sympathizers and refugees from hegemony oppression. The station's name was Sanctuary, and it was a marvel of hidden engineering. Built into a hollow asteroid and powered by controlled stellar fusion, it housed nearly 10,000 beings from dozens of different species. But what made it truly special was its population. They were all craftspeople, artisans, and makers who had preserved pre-hegemony knowledge in the face of 7 centuries of suppression. When the Phoenix docked at Sanctuary, Marcus found himself at the center of something he'd never imagined, a resistance movement built around the principles his grandfather had taught him. Metalworkers, jewelers, programmers, bioengineers, quantum architects, all of them united by the belief that creation was more powerful than conquest. HFY was waiting at the docking bay, along with dozens of other beings who regarded Marcus with expressions ranging from curiosity. Word of Kithara's liberation had traveled faster than any ship could fly, carried through quantum entanglement networks that connected every forge, workshop, and laboratory in the Resistance. "Welcome to Sanctuary, Smith Marcus," HFY said formally. "Your actions on Dracoris Prime have inspired hope throughout the galaxy. Will you accept the tools and knowledge we offer in service of the greater liberation?" Marcus looked around at the assembled artisans, seeing in their faces the same dedication his grandfather had carried. These weren't soldiers or revolutionaries in the conventional sense. They were makers, builders, people who understood that lasting change came through patient craft rather than violent destruction. "I'll accept whatever help you can give," he said, "but I need to understand what we're really attempting here. The hegemony has ruled for 7 centuries. They have fleets, armies, entire star systems under their control. How does freeing a handful of dragons change any of that?" It was Kithara who answered, her voice carrying the weight of ancient wisdom. "Because the hegemony's power is borrowed power, stolen from sources they do not truly understand. Every ship in their fleet is powered by dragon life force. Every weapon they wield draws its energy from our imprisoned brothers and sisters. When we are free, their technological supremacy collapses overnight." She gestured toward the station around them, where beings of a dozen different species worked side by side on projects that defied conventional physics. "But more than that, our freedom returns balance to the galaxy. The dragons were never meant to be rulers. We were meant to be teachers, guides, partners in the great work of creation. When that partnership was broken, the galaxy lost something essential. Restoring it will change everything." The next 3 weeks at Sanctuary transformed Marcus's understanding of both his mission and his capabilities. The station's workshops were filled with tools and techniques that made his grandfather's forge seem primitive by comparison, but they all operated on the same fundamental principles: skill, patience, and respect for the materials being shaped. He learned to forge quantum resonance chambers that could amplify psychic energy across interstellar distances. He mastered the art of crystalline programming, creating information storage devices that thought for themselves while remaining absolutely loyal to their creators. Most importantly, he began to understand how individual acts of creation could combine into something greater than their sum. The Resistance had been preparing for this moment for generations, gathering knowledge and resources while waiting for someone with the skills and determination to begin the liberation. Each free dragon would make the next rescue easier, as their combined knowledge and power gave the Resistance new tools and capabilities. But the hegemony wasn't passive in the face of this threat. Intelligence reports began filtering into Sanctuary, describing massive military mobilizations throughout their territory. Entire fleets were being recalled from frontier operations and redeployed to guard the remaining prison facilities. New weapons were being deployed: energy cannons that fired crystallized dragon essence, shields powered by tortured consciousness, ships that existed partially outside normal space-time. "They're preparing for a war," reported Captain Voss, the station's intelligence coordinator, "but it's not a war they understand how to fight. Their entire military doctrine is based on overwhelming force and technological superiority. They're trying to counter techniques that work on completely different principles." Marcus studied the tactical displays with growing concern. The hegemony response was massive and coordinated, but it was also predictable. They were fortifying static positions and preparing for conventional attacks that would never come. Meanwhile, the real battle would be fought in dimensions they couldn't perceive, using weapons they couldn't comprehend. "We need to move faster than they can adapt," he said finally. "Each liberation weakens them and strengthens us, but only if we can maintain the initiative. Once they figure out how to counter our techniques, they won't," Kythara interjected confidently. "Not because they lack intelligence, but because they lack understanding. The hegemony sees the universe as a machine to be controlled, resources to be exploited, problems to be solved through force. They cannot comprehend that creation might be more powerful than destruction, because such understanding would require them to fundamentally change who they are." She turned to address the assembled artisans, her human guise flickering as her true power showed through. The ancient compact is renewed. Smith and Dragon work together once more, not as master and servant, but as partners in the great work. Together, we will forge a future worthy of both our peoples. The cheers that greeted her words came from 100 different throats, speaking dozens of languages, but they all carried the same message: hope given form, possibility made manifest, the promise that even the mightiest tyrants could fall before the patient work of skilled hands. Marcus felt the weight of destiny settling around his shoulders like his grandfather's old apron. The real work was just beginning, and the galaxy would never be the same when it was finished. But looking around at the faces of his new allies, beings who had kept faith with ancient principles across centuries of oppression, he knew they would succeed. The dragons would fly free again, and the stars themselves would sing with the harmony of creation restored. As the Phoenix prepared to depart Sanctuary for their next mission, Marcus made one final addition to his equipment: a communications beacon forged from dragon crystal and human steel, tuned to frequencies that could reach across the galaxy instantly. When the next liberation began, every forge, every workshop, every hidden sanctuary would know that the age of freedom had dawned. The hegemony had ruled through fear and stolen power for 700 years. But their time was ending, one broken chain at a time, one free dragon at a time, one perfectly forged tool at a time. The galaxy was about to remember what it meant to create rather than conquer, and the consequences would echo through the cosmos for millennia to come. 6 months after Kythara's liberation, the galaxy was transforming in ways that no one, not even the dragons, had fully anticipated. What had begun as a rescue mission had evolved into something far more profound. a fundamental shift in the relationship between consciousness and reality itself. Marcus stood in the command center of Haven, the mobile fortress that had become the heart of the Liberation movement. Built from a hollowed-out asteroid using techniques that combined human engineering with Dragon quantum architecture, Haven existed simultaneously in 17 different dimensional phases, making it effectively invisible to hegemony detection while providing sanctuary for the growing rebellion. Through the transparent aluminum viewport, he could see the Cerberus Nebula where their latest victory had taken place. 3 days ago, this region of space had contained the most heavily fortified hegemony prison complex in the galaxy, Tartarus Station, where the Dragon Lord Zarathos had been held in crystalline stasis for 6 centuries. Now, all that remained of the facility was expanding clouds of superheated plasma, and Zarathos flew free among the stars for the first time since the Great Betrayal. 14 liberated, 3 to go, Kithara announced as she joined Marcus at the viewport. Her human guise had evolved over the months, becoming more comfortable and natural while still retaining the otherworldly grace that marked her true nature. The hegemony's power structure is collapsing faster than their military can compensate for. Marcus nodded, but his expression remained troubled. Each liberation had been harder than the last, requiring increasingly sophisticated techniques and greater personal risk. The hegemony had learned to adapt, developing new containment methods and defensive strategies with each defeat. More concerning, they had begun using their remaining dragon prisoners as weapons, forcing them to power superweapons that could crack planets and tear holes in space-time itself. "What's the status report from the Voss expedition?" Marcus asked, referring to the team that had been gathering intelligence on the final 3 prison sites. "Complex," Kithara admitted. "The good news is that we've located all 3 remaining dragons. The bad news is that the hegemony has consolidated them into a single facility, the Nexus, hidden in the gravitational shadow of the galactic core black hole. They're using the extreme physics of that environment as an additional layer of containment." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the command center's climate control. The Nexus was legendary even among hegemony installations, a research facility where their most dangerous experiments were conducted, protected by gravitational fields that could crush entire fleets and temporal distortions that made conventional navigation impossible. "There's more," Kithara continued. "Our sources indicate that the hegemony isn't just holding our people prisoner anymore. They're attempting something called the Unity Protocol, a process that would merge all 3 remaining dragons into a single consciousness, under their complete control. If they succeed," she didn't need to finish. "A unified dragon consciousness under hegemony control would give their enemies power beyond imagining. The ability to reshape reality on a galactic scale, to rewrite the fundamental laws of physics in their favor. It would make their current tyranny seem gentle by comparison." "How long do we have? Days? Possibly hours." The Unity Protocol requires a specific alignment of quantum fields that occurs only rarely near the galactic center. Our calculations suggest the next optimal window begins in approximately 72 hours. Marcus turned away from the viewport and began walking toward Haven's central workshop, where the greatest collection of master artisans in galactic history had been laboring for months on their most ambitious project yet. Kythera fell into step beside him, her presence a comforting warmth in the face of seemingly impossible odds. The workshop occupied the heart of Haven, a vast spherical chamber where artificial gravity flowed in patterns that defied conventional physics. Here, beings from 100 different species worked side by side on projects that would have been dismissed as fantasy just a year ago. Quantum forges burned with fires that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Master craftspeople shaped materials that had never been seen outside the cores of dying stars. And at the center of it all, slowly taking shape through the combined efforts of the galaxy's greatest makers, was humanity's answer to 700 years of oppression. The World Forge was unlike anything that had ever been conceived, let alone constructed. Part ship, part weapon, part cosmic tuning fork, it represented the ultimate expression of the partnership between human craftsmanship and dragon wisdom. Where the hegemony sought to control reality through force, the World Forge would reshape it through harmony, convincing the universe itself to embrace a new configuration of possibility. "Report!" Marcus called out as he entered the main construction area. HFY looked up from where they had been calibrating quantum resonance chambers, their pale features streaked with exotic lubricants and dimensional dust. "The primary matrices are stable, and the consciousness interface is operating within acceptable parameters. But we're still having problems with the temporal integration systems." Marcus nodded and moved to examine the problematic components. The Worldforge's greatest challenge wasn't its physical construction. Dragon engineering could solve any merely mechanical problem. The real difficulty lay in creating a system that could maintain coherence while operating across multiple time streams simultaneously. "The issue is philosophical as much as technical," explained Dr. Sarah Chen, Marcus's sister, and the project's chief theoretical physicist. She had arrived at Haven 3 months ago, abandoning a prestigious position at the Terran Science Academy to join what she called the most important engineering project in the history of consciousness. The Worldforge needs to exist in real time to respond to immediate threats, but it also needs to operate in accelerated time to outpace hegemony reactions and in decelerated time to allow for the precise adjustments required for reality manipulation. Keeping all 3 temporal states synchronized requires a level of quantum processing that pushes even dragon mathematics to their limits. Marcus studied the equations floating in the holographic displays around the temporal integration chamber. The mathematics were elegant but incredibly complex, describing relationships between consciousness, time, and space that human science was only beginning to understand. But as he watched the numbers flow across the displays, he began to see patterns that reminded him of something far more familiar. "It's like folding steel," he said suddenly. "When you're working with a complex alloy, you have to heat different parts at different rates to get the proper molecular alignment. But the key isn't to force the process. It's to find the natural rhythm and work with it." He moved to the temporal control interface and began making adjustments, his hands guided by intuition rather than calculation. Instead of trying to impose synchronization on the 3 time streams, he began looking for the points where they naturally wanted to converge, the quantum harmonics that would allow them to exist in stable relationship rather than forced alignment. "That's actually working," Sarah said in amazement as the system's chaos indicators began dropping toward acceptable levels. "But how did you know to adjust the phase variance in that pattern?" "I didn't know," Marcus admitted. "I just listened to what the system was trying to tell me. Metal has its own wisdom, its own preferences. You can force it into any shape you want, but it works better when you convince it to take the shape it wants to be." Kithara smiled approvingly. "And that, dear Smith, is why dragons chose humans as partners rather than servants. You understand instinctively what took us millennia to learn, that the greatest power comes not from imposing your will on the universe, but from discovering what the universe wants to become and helping it get there." With the temporal synchronization problem solved, the Worldforge's construction accelerated rapidly. Components that had been manufactured separately over the past months were integrated into a unified whole, each piece finding its place in the greater design-like notes in a cosmic symphony. The result was something that defied conventional description, a vessel that was simultaneously organic and mechanical, ancient and futuristic, weapon and sanctuary. But even as the Worldforge neared completion, intelligence reports from the galactic core grew increasingly alarming. The hegemony had begun implementing emergency protocols throughout their territory, recalling fleets and evacuating non-essential personnel from border regions. They were preparing for something massive, something that would either secure their power forever or destroy everything they had built. "They know we're coming," reported Captain Voss during the final strategy briefing. "Our sources indicate that the Nexus has been placed on maximum alert status, with every defensive system active and additional ships deployed in the gravitational defense perimeter. They're not taking any chances." Marcus studied the tactical displays showing the Nexus facility and its defenses. The station itself was a marvel of engineering, built into an artificial asteroid that orbited the galactic center black hole at a precisely calculated distance that balanced gravitational forces against tidal shearing. The defensive fleet surrounding it was the largest military force the hegemony had ever assembled in one location. Nearly 1,000 ships, ranging from massive dreadnoughts to specialized interdiction vessels designed to prevent any approach to the facility. "Conventional assault is impossible," admitted Admiral Corvus, the rebellion's senior military strategist. "Even with our expanded fleet and the support of free dragons, we don't have the firepower to break through those defenses. They've turned the entire region into a killing field." "Then it's a good thing we're not planning a conventional assault," Marcus replied. He activated the World Forge's holographic display, showing the vessel's completed configuration. The World Forge isn't designed to fight their fleet. It's designed to ignore it entirely. Kithara took over the explanation, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate directly with their listeners' consciousness. "The Unity Protocol requires the hegemony to lower their prisoners' containment fields at the moment of merger. For exactly 17 seconds, the three dragons will be accessible to external influence. The World Forge will use those 17 seconds to establish a quantum link with our people, providing them with the tools and knowledge they need to break free and reverse the Unity Protocol." 17 seconds, Sarah said quietly. "Across a distance of several light years through gravitational distortions that make normal space-time navigation impossible, while under fire from the largest military force in galactic history." 17 seconds, Marcus confirmed. "More than enough time if everything works perfectly." The departure from Haven was unlike anything Marcus had experienced. The World Forge didn't simply move through space, it negotiated with reality itself, convincing local physics to step aside while it passed. The journey to the galactic core, which should have taken weeks even at maximum hyperspace velocity, was completed in 3 days of travel that existed somewhat outside normal time. As they approached the Nexus region, the World Forge's sensors began detecting the massive gravitational anomalies that surrounded the galactic center. The black hole at the galaxy's heart was a monster beyond comprehension, its gravity well deep enough to trap light itself and its accretion disk visible as a ring of fire, stretching across millions of kilometers. In that environment, the normal rules of physics became suggestions at best. "Hegemony fleet detected," reported Zeph from the sensor station. "Configuration matches our intelligence reports. Circular defensive formation with overlapping fields of fire and gravitational interdiction fields. They're ready for us." Marcus took his position at the World Forge's primary control interface, feeling the vast ship's consciousness merge with his own. Around him, the control chamber filled with dragon allies and human artisans, each one focused on their role in the impossible rescue attempt about to begin. "All stations report ready," Kithara announced. "Unity Protocol initiation detected at the Nexus. We have approximately 4 minutes until the containment fields are lowered." The World Forge began its final approach, sliding through dimensions that existed parallel to normal space. The Hegemony fleet's sensors registered brief anomalies but couldn't lock on to anything solid enough to target. They were looking for an enemy approaching through conventional space, not one that was rewriting the local definition of existence. 3 minutes to window, Sarah called out. Temporal synchronization holding steady across all parameters. Marcus felt the World Forge's systems come fully online around him, quantum processors calculating probability matrices that would have overwhelmed any conventional computer. This wasn't just advanced technology, it was applied philosophy, the marriage of consciousness and mathematics that the dragons had perfected over millions of years. 2 minutes. Nexus facility is beginning Unity Protocol initialization sequence. Through the World Forge's sensors, Marcus could perceive the 3 imprisoned dragons, Thessarian, Mordian, and Ancient Valorex, each one bound in chains designed specifically for their unique nature. Thessarian was caught in temporal loops that aged her rapidly while preventing her death. Mordian was trapped in crystalline matrices that turned his strength against himself. and Valorex was held in quantum suspension, his consciousness scattered across multiple probability states to prevent him from achieving coherent thought. 1. Hegemony fleet is beginning to react to our presence. Multiple targeting locks detected. The first weapons fire began reaching them as the Worldforge crossed the outer defensive perimeter. But the shots passed through empty space where the ship's quantum signature suggested it should be, striking nothing but vacuum and gravitational echoes. 30 seconds. Nexus facility is powering up the Unity Protocol merger chambers. Marcus could feel the three dragons' terror and rage as the Hegemony's technicians prepared to strip away their individual consciousness and forge them into a weapon of absolute obedience. 700 years of imprisonment had been preparation for this moment, the final victory of tyranny. 10 seconds. Unity Protocol containment fields are beginning to fluctuate. The Worldforge dropped fully into normal spacetime directly above the Nexus facility, its presence causing gravitational waves that rippled outward through the black hole's accretion disk. Every sensor in the Hegemony fleet screamed warnings as something impossible materialized in their defensive grid. Containment fields are down! Connection window is open! After hundreds of years, a human smith liberates an alien dragon, HFY Sci-Fi,